All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. I really appreciate your time learning something new. In this specific session, Aaron and I will actually go through some of the frameworks that we've actually discovered. Well, actually learned, discovered, and we wanted to share with you. It's related to executable TSGs or troubleshooting guides with notebooks for SQL people. So some of these learnings is actually quite amazing because when we first looked at notebooks, it was specifically for data science, which Simon sort of mentioned a little bit earlier. But it turned out that some of the simplest things that you do, or actually could be quite complex during incident response, can also be solved using notebooks. So today, myself, Julia Koesmarno, and Aaron are gonna talk about this a little bit more. And if you know Aaron, he's gonna sprinkle a lot of PowerShell in this session as well. All right, let's get started. All right, our learning journey today. First of all, I'm going to set a basic sort of stage for you in terms of troubleshooting guides and what it means by notebooks. And Aaron was going to talk about the executable TSGs or troubleshooting guides with notebooks. And then I'm going to show you some tips on how to jumpstart with the TSG notebooks and a couple of resources. The good news is that all of these resources are already, well, at least the slide deck is already available online. So if you go to the link on the bottom, the bit.ly short URL, you can go there and download this slide deck and follow along too. All right, let's jump in. Introduction to TSGs and notebooks. Okay, so in this specific session, when I mention TSG or troubleshooting guide, it could be it could encompass SOP as well as standard operating procedure. In some, I guess, in some of the companies that we have worked with, the industry also call them playbook or runbook. Essentially, playbook is steps to identify issues, which is very similar to troubleshooting guide. So it's the diagnosis steps, and runbook is when you actually want to achieve a specific action, usually to do with the mitigation. And in some cases, some companies just simplify this and call it knowledge base. Either way, it's for incident response, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. All right. Okay, before you run, and this is a bit of a warning because I have to say this, while we talk about tech, when you do roll this new framework out in your organization, it is about change agent. So before you run, I do want to share a bit of a lessons here. First of all, whenever you actually want to deploy this new way of, using notebooks or anything at all really related to incident response, make sure you know your goals, understand the gaps, and then plan for it and include the people who are actually stakeholders to incident response. And yeah, plan. All right, with that put aside, let's get started with notebooks in Azure Data Studio. All right, so let me show you this. So this is Azure Data Studio. And actually, if you followed along since this morning my time, but we did show a little bit about it. Bob Ward mentioned about it. And today I'm going to show you more about Azure Data Studio. And in the next session, my colleague Drew will also talk about Azure Data Studio. So lots of Azure Data Studio love today, so which is great. So this is Azure Data Studio. It's a client tool, and it is available on cross-platform, meaning if you actually run Mac OS or Linux or Windows, I happen to have this on Windows, by the way, this will work for you. And the cool thing about this is you can connect to your, say, SQL Server instance, on-prem, or Azure SQL, or Azure Data Explorer from Azure Data Studio. But there's also a way for you to create a new notebook, and then this is how this works. So for example, file, and then new notebook. And then from here, you'll see a blank slate of notebook. So let me just minimize this a little bit, that way it's not too distracting. So this is a brand new notebook. First thing that you will see on the top here are a couple of things, cells and run all and kernel and touch to, and I'll go through each of them one by one really briefly. So in notebooks, there are two things that you usually care about the most because you have to write this or use this. The first one is the text cell, and the other one is code cell. So here's an example of me writing a text cell. Let me switch to rich text view because it's essentially just as if you're writing like a note, right? So let me type in hello world. This is my text cell, such, and then I can also do formatting. So it's really nice WYSIWYG kind of way of entering your notes in notebooks. But you could also, if you're really good with Markdown already, maybe you use it elsewhere, you can go full Markdown and start typing, Markdown codes for your notes. And the next type of cell that I'm going to talk about here is code cell. So this is where you start typing in code, for example, select, top 10 stuff from sys.objects, and then you can run it against a specific connection. Now, before I get to the connection, you're probably wondering, well, that code cell there, that looks SQL, and that would work because I'm going to be running this against a SQL kernel. But I could also run a KQL query. I could also run PowerShell, which what Aaron's going to show you later. If you're familiar with Python, maybe you're a data scientist or data engineers, you can use this too. So it's pretty cool. And here's another trick that I wanted to show you. And this is important to know because I think this helps you to kind of uncover more efficient way in terms of working with your notebook. So as an example here, I just right click and click new notebook. And from here, I'm already connected to my demo. But obviously you could also change the connection from my previous notebook too. And then from this notebook, you can start typing the queries. So for example, the ones that I had earlier, let me just type this here. Whoops, look at that. Oh no, I just did a text cell. What's happening? Okay, I did a boo-boo, that's okay. There is a way of converting a cell to code cell like this, and I can start running it. And so this will give me the top 10 star of the objects. Voila. So what that really means is a notebook allows you to add text, which means you can provide description. It will allow you to add code as well as run it. And when you save this notebook file, the result set will actually be saved as well. So when you think about during the incident response, when you run specific code, you usually have to read about the context of what's going on before you run the script, and then you run the script so you see the results. Sometimes you have to do some auditing. So this is one great way of, working with incident response where you run the cells, the code cells, and saving the result set as part of that auditing step. Now, you're probably wondering, show me what that roughly looks like. Okay, so here's a template that I've created earlier. Let me jump to here. All right, so this is a pretty basic template on troubleshooting guide. So from here, I have a troubleshooting guide title, and this is just some guidance about what would be, great for troubleshooting guides, some characteristics of good troubleshooting guides. And then I have some content. So for example, overview, etc. So let's go and jump to some of them, perhaps symptoms. So when you do troubleshooting, you usually kind of have to verify that the symptoms are as what you expect. And then you go through the mitigation, that's to solve it, and mitigation step 1, 2, and as many as needed. And then you verify if what you have mitigated actually are mitigated fully. And then the next step would be obviously communicate to your stakeholders or whoever might be affected by the incident. So that's roughly a very super fast introduction of Notebook, what it is, how you can connect to SQL. You can connect to the SQL connection that I showed you earlier is actually connecting with SQL Server 2019, but you can also connect to Azure SQL DBA or MI as an example. And then I've shown you a template, which is super easy to follow here. And I'll provide a link, or actually, if you go to the GitHub page, the bit.ly URL earlier, you should be able to get to this page really easily. A couple of things before I hand it over to Aaron. I do want to show you, you're probably wondering who else is using this. Now, if you are familiar with GitHub already, you probably are aware of the Microsoft GitHub. We have Tiger Toolbox. Azure Data Studio is an open source. It's also on GitHub, by the way. So Tiger Toolbox has got a lot of useful scripts, and one of them is troubleshooting notebooks. And then you can simply go to one of them. So, for example, this BP check one, and then if you go to raw, and this is actually a quick trick. See how this is all JSON? That's what notebook underneath notebook is about. So if I copy this URL, and then I go open here, so Control O, paste the raw link. It's going to load the notebook that you saw from here. It's going to start rendering it. GitHub in itself, if you check in your IPYNB file or notebook file, will render it like this, like as you see on the screen. Okay. There are actually a lot of community contribution, but I'll let Aaron talk a little bit more about how he has used notebooks for troubleshooting in his daily work. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Aaron.
Okay, great. Go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you're getting any feedback on my mic.
You're good.
All right, so I've got kind of a variety pack of things that I want to walk you through today. A little bit on the troubleshooting side that's easy to show you, and then some other things. I'm actually going to pull in some pieces of demos from about 3 or 4 different presentations I've given, all of them with notebooks, and just give you different flavors of what you can do to create your troubleshooting guides. The thing about troubleshooting guides is something that's really, really helpful for my environment. Might be a little niche for your environment, so they don't 100% of the time carry over, but there are some generic ones that we can go through today, like the BP check that Julie mentioned, as well as the SQL Assessment Notebook that's also available. We'll go ahead and start looking through the BP check that she pointed out, and we'll walk through here. This is available up in the Tiger Toolbox, and these are in there as JSON. You can download these straight from there. Just do a quick call. This is all encapsulated in the notebooks that are out my GitHub repo. And the notebook that we're dealing with is actually this one over here. So let's look on the right here a bit. We'll see that this notebook, it's actually pretty large and has something like 30 some odd different queries inside of it. And this could be that kind of notebook where you start with it and you go and you look for it. You look for the problem. So this could be, we need to gather some information and we don't know exactly where we're going to find that problem, but these are the steps we've used to get to that problem in the past. And we want these queries to be used anytime we want to run into this problem again. So obviously, some of these are just basic comments here. In your own environment, these may be more specific descriptions of the situation, or in some cases, they may just be like, run one of these 5 queries, and if you see one coming back with a lot of results, that might be your issue. You put in there in those markdown cells the important information to make whoever's using it, possibly you, but if it's the middle of the night, might not be you, hopefully not you, right, if it's in the middle of the night, and then might be someone else. So you want to give them a good guide as to what to do. So when you put these together, you can make them so that you can run through them and go through step by step by step, and you can do that to gather the information. There's another way that you can do them with the SQL notebooks, and I'll kind of refer to it. They're all Jupyter notebooks, but here in the data world that I live in, I work in mainly two types of notebooks. It's a SQL notebook, meaning that it is the SQL kernel that we have over here, or it is a PowerShell notebook, meaning it's either the PowerShell notebook kernel that comes with ADS or the .NET notebook kernel that comes with .NET Interactive, which allows you to do C#, F#, and PowerShell all in the same notebook if you so desire. So coming back here, we've got this notebook, and let's say I've got to run it, and I want to do my troubleshooting, and I want to run it on one machine. Well, hitting the run all switch is pretty easy, and I can go ahead and get information back from a whole bunch of different queries, a whole bunch of good information, And hopefully some of these queries can actually be written in a way to kind of help make it obvious once they discover an issue. Now, what if my situation isn't on one machine? What if I have 5 machines? What if I have 20 machines? And some of them are working well, and some of them are not. And I'm trying to find out what's the same between them and what's not the same between them, and try and help drill down into that problem. And I'm using our standard notebook, but I need to now run it across all these machines. So in this notebook that I've got here available for you, for you to get your head around this is all kind of, this thing, the BP check, it's from the Tiger team at Microsoft. It's the kind of thing you can feel confident to pull down, run, obviously take a look at it, it's code off the internet, but then run it against your machines and it will give you good information back. So running it against one machine, okay, I can do that. But there's also this command that comes in PowerShell that came out actually 2 years ago now, called Invoke SQL Notebook. Invoke SQL Notebook is very powerful because it allows you to, first off, notebook, right? 2, it allows you to gather that information back and store it in the results file that basically clones the notebook. So first thing it would do is take this notebook here on the right, and it would make a copy of it and then run all those 30 some odd queries and then start sticking the results into that file. And then I have my master copy that I have not changed. And then I've got this one with all the information in it, and it's ready for me to be able to go back to the next time I need to use it. In addition to just doing it on, executing and getting the results, I can also get results from multiple machines if I so desire. And I've just stepped you through here in a quick, easy way of how to do it. So in this one, I'm actually just showing you, hopefully folks are familiar with registered servers or central management server in SQL Server Management Studio. It's a way to just have a list of your SQL servers that are all around. And this step just goes through and make sure that you have connectivity to each one of the machines that are in your registered servers file. And once you've verified that, you can even go so far as to get the database of them if you want to check down at that level. Once you are sure that you've got your connectivity up and running, you can run this in Invoke SQL Notebook command, and you can run that BP check. And you can, let me just make those screen size or text size a little larger for everyone. You can run that BP check and have it do this out file and place this wherever you want, give it a name with whatever you want. I would, recommend possibly putting in the server name if you're doing SQL servers, putting in the date because, hey, you might come back and run this a week from now. And then it would be able to run and save all those outputs for you for all your SQL servers. So in this demo, I've got, my 4 little SQL servers here, and I run it across all of them, and I get the responses back from all of them, and I've got these 4 separate files. And now I can start comparing them and seeing, take a look at the ones that are having problems and see what's difference between them and the ones that aren't having problems. And the great thing is, this can happen, you're executing this notebook when you run into the problem, because we all know that sometimes problems happen, and then as you're gathering the information, the problem goes away, and now you can't reproduce it, right? And you got to wait till the next time it happens to try to capture it again. And that's a great thing about doing this automated troubleshooting here, is that you can run the notebooks all at once, get all those results back, and then start poring over the numbers later and looking through things, or maybe not even later, during, but you've already captured the information and you're already retaining it. So that's one of the examples that I've got for you guys here. And that's one approach to it. Another approach that you can do is just maybe you're helping someone set something up, and it might be to set up something even just to, it might be something as simple as you need to be able to recreate, stand up this environment for this tool that you guys don't always use, but sometimes you do, and not everyone remembers how to do it. So the great way to take that knowledge, stick it into a notebook with all the steps, and then when the next time you have to run back to it, you've got it all right there. Let me show you one of those examples real quick. So just as a basic example, I've got this Powershell notebook. It is here just to stand up a SQL server and restore some databases. So if you want to think of this, how would this apply to your environment? Maybe you need to restore the database and maybe stand up an instance, restore the database and run some cleansing, or run a load test against it and then try and run your app against it, or do something else and maybe recreate a problem, right? Or go in there to solve the problem or improve performance. So what this does is it goes through and it sets up my SQL server for me and does all the stuff that I need to worry about and gets everything up and running. Again, including restoring my database so that I can go ahead and start working with it right away and putting everything in its place. And I can go on from here and add credentials and add additional information if I so desire. And what's awesome about this is one of the different aspects of notebooks that I want to make sure people are aware is available to them right now is that these things are automatable. In this case, sorry, I'm kind of resizing my machine. I'm working with this notebook over here on the right-hand side of my screen, right? And I want to go ahead and do that action where I go ahead and create a new SQL server, right? So I want to do all the steps that are inside of there. And the thing is, when I create a SQL server, I need to give it a password. And in this case, I'm going to give it a port number. I might need to give it a name. I might need to give it something else to go ahead and make it work for my environment. So I'm going to pass in these parameters into the notebook as I go and execute it. And I'm going to go ahead and kick this off so it can go ahead and start running here for a minute. Hopefully everything works out. And let me tell you about it now. So this one comes from a module called Powershell Notebook. And it is originally started from a guy named Doug Fink, helped out with James O'Neill and actually some of my code that I did and some other Microsoft SQL team members. And didn't work this time. It worked earlier today. It's been a hit or miss lately. I installed the new version of Docker Desktop, and it has been slightly more problematic. But I did run this earlier today, so I already have one running. Let me see. And yeah, and it actually is up and running, but maybe my machine's just running slower because I'm sharing video, and so I need to increase those sleep timers. But anyways, it's up and it really is up and running, and I've got the other one from earlier today when I did it. So to be able to do this kind of thing, first you would need to install module Powershell Notebook, and it comes with this invoke execute notebook command that allows you to take a Powershell notebook, only works on Powershell notebooks, but works very wonderfully, and allows you to go ahead and pass parameters into the notebook as you execute them. And it also allows you to, again, save a copy of the notebook as you execute them. And another cool thing that allows you to do is convert your files over to notebooks. So earlier, while Julie was speaking, I went ahead and, oops, I spelled. I went ahead and took my list of commands that I'm working with here, and I just went through and did a quick, where is it? There it is. I took this PS1 file and I just said, go ahead and grab it and convert it to a Powershell notebook. And now I've got it available over here. And so I've just converted all that PowerShell code that I was working with here. Now I've got it over here, and now I can save it. Now I've got my executable notebook. So that's another part of the PowerShell notebook module. And then one last way of approaching these notebooks that I want to show you, besides the fact that you can pass parameters to them, terrific, makes them extremely useful, and it makes it a lot more. I know I'm doing a very basic SA password, but there are more advanced ways of storing those passwords. That's working, this example, I'm doing things on-prem here on my local machine, but I can also be interacting with the cloud. when I work with these PowerShell notebooks or SQL notebooks. So to give you a quick example of that, I've actually gone ahead and used the Power BI commandlet to log into my Power BI tenant. And I've got another notebook that I want to show you real quick. Just one moment, I want to pull that up. And it is this export Power BI assets. Just one example. It's a data governance example. It marries up with pulling the log file information in case I need to pull the logs out of the tenant and see what's going on, and then marry that data up. I've already got a PowerShell notebook that does all this for me. And what's beautiful about this is I'm able to grab everything, and in this case, I'm saving my results to Excel, and then I pull it back into a Power BI Power BI report file, and then reviewing the information to analyze it. But I've got all these steps all defined, well-defined, and everything is taken care of. I can run it myself. I can hand it off to someone else to run it. And it is, going to always be able to capture the stuff that is important and capture it right away. And if there's someone running into an issue, I can put in those comments of, here's a couple checks that you might want to look into. So let me just close this one down, give us a little more screen real estate. We'll have a little less going on here. So when I do that, I've got one that's specifically for the notebook automation. And I've already, in this case, like I said, logged in. And now I just want to go ahead and execute that notebook. And since I've already logged into my tenant, it's going to have that information cached, and it's going to be able to connect to my Power BI tenant, get all the stuff out of my cloud, and be able to organize that information for me. And I'll just go ahead and kick that off here right now. And again, this is using that invoke execute notebook out of the PowerShell notebook module. And that'll take a minute to come down. And I'll just go ahead and show you where oops, not that one. This one, right over here. Here's the Excel file where I'm exporting it. You can see it's got today's date, just finished happening right now. Pulled this information down. Now, obviously, I don't have to bring it down to Excel, right? I'm connected to the cloud. I could go ahead and be saving this to an Azure SQL database or something like that, maybe a blob store, whatever I need. And it has just taken all this catalog of information, brought it down for me, and now I'm ready to marry it up and put it into my troubleshooting guide to go from here. So the ability to go ahead and connect to the cloud with these notebooks is extremely important to call out. If you see the Invoke SQL Notebook help, so going back to the SQL notebooks, we are able to use the Connect AZ account, grab an access token, and actually pass that in as one of the parameters to the Invoke SQL Notebook command. That way we can run that same notebook up against maybe an Azure SQL VM and run all the code, run all the queries, get all the results, store them back in into wherever our notebook file is going to be, and it's ready to go. So those are the main three different ways of approaching notebooks. Just your troubleshooting guide, then your troubleshooting guide with maybe parameters, and then also gathering up your information from your tenant and storing it, whether that's back on-prem for a little bit of just in-depth diagnostics on your machine, or redirecting that information straight out to an Azure SQL database. All of those options are available to you. And that's the quick high-level run-through. And the last thing on troubleshooting I do want to call out is that there is a SQL Assessments Notebook that can do some great in-depth information checking, very similar to the best practices check, but allows you to target down to just one check so that you could take one of those checks and run it against all your SQL servers. And one of my favorites out of there is actually, there's a check that just checks to see if you have the latest cumulative update. That's something that Bob Ward was talking about in the last session. And you're able to just take that information and, take that command, run it across all your SQL servers and get it all back into one spot. And then see which ones you need to patch, or maybe you're all up to date and you're good to go and you don't have to patch anything, which would be great. So that is my quick and dirty, fast, around the world tour of the mechanics of troubleshooting guides and T-SQL notebooks, PowerShell notebooks, and how you can work on automating them in your environment.
Super cool. Thank you, Aaron. So I'm gonna steal the screen a little bit here. Just a moment. Okay. All right. So I've been answering some of the questions on the chat. So that was a really good question. So thank you, Aaron, for the demo. So let's kind of recap a little bit about what you've seen earlier. So earlier we've talked about text cells, code cells, and the different languages that you can use. And there's this new concept of Jupyter Book, which I haven't talked about before, but it's a good way of organizing your notebooks together. And yeah, so this is a quick example of I think this is a little bit more on the data analysis kind of example. But there was one question earlier: Can you do charting in SQL Notebook? And the answer is yes, you can. So this is an example. If we have time, I'll be happy to demo that live. So, and a couple of you also asked on the chat as well. So is Azure Data Studio free? And the answer is free, yes. And it supports multiple data platforms. So if you have Postgres, Azure SQL Edge, Azure SQL, Azure Data Explorer, if you have your instances, SQL Server instances on-prem, or perhaps in some other kind of cloud providers, you can also connect to them. You can use it on Linux, Mac OS. And because it's a fork of VS Code, we have this shared we have this kind of extensible framework. Essentially, you can create an extension to Azure Data Studio should you decide if it makes more sense to customize, some of the experiences in your way. So we do have a couple of folks in the community that do that, as well as ISVs as an example. So that's really good. On top of that, it supports Git. So when you think about it, and I kind of want to drill into the Git a little bit more here. If your troubleshooting guide currently today resides in something like Word document, or maybe somewhere on kind of like a OneNote as an example, the challenge with that is it may get out of date, and there is also no version control. So you don't have this rigor of software engineering practices applied to your code or your documentation for troubleshooting guides. So like Aaron mentioned earlier, notebooks in Azure Data Studio is actually essentially using the Jupyter Notebooks standard. So it's just that in Azure Data Studio, we customize it to make it much richer, much better for data professionals. So as an example, some of the key ones that we actually recently pushed was that WYSIWYG, or the rich text editing. In most of the Jupyter Notebook editor out there, normally you would have to write Markdown, but in Azure Data Studio, you don't have to. That way, the jump start is actually quite easy. All right. Okay. So we talked about executable TSGs. Aaron has demoed it. Now I want to draw back to the troubleshooting guides and the incident response challenges a little bit here. Now, in most cases, if your organization, if your teams are super organized, hopefully the troubleshooting guides are actually residing in a central location. But it so turns out whenever we talk to the folks in the community, in the data community, we heard quite a lot of, oh yeah, it's the cheat sheet or the troubleshooting guides or the knowledge base is actually stored on OneNote. And then there's usually code snippets here and there. I usually copy it and then put it locally in my machine so that if a similar issue happen again, I just have to open it from my machine. So essentially you have your siloed environment or siloed troubleshooting guides sitting in your closet, which makes it hard to discover. Sharing code is hard, and it's also hard to crowdsource. So some of the examples that Aaron and I have showed earlier, related to the Tiger Toolbox, the SQL Assessment Toolkit, and more, they are actually available online, which means if people want to help improve it, they can, right? So that's one of the advantage of having troubleshooting guides in a version controlled manner, or if possible, publish it on GitHub. Okay, all right. So let me jump a little bit here now. You actually have seen this before, but I really want to instill it just for today, for the next couple of minutes here. When you think about notebooks, chances are you probably have seen this before. Like, it looks a little bit similar to your past school science projects. And when you do your science project, you usually have this kind of scientific method paper that you have to fill in. And when you write your troubleshooting guides, I think it's actually really useful to think about it in that way as well. Some folks separate the hypothesis and the symptoms steps, I suppose, in one notebook, and then some folks, put the mitigation in separate notebook as an example. So the first part is usually the TSG or the playbook, and then the latter part is the run book or the standard operating procedure. So yeah, so there's a lot of different ways of capturing the essence of troubleshooting guides in a more structured way. And it's something for you and the team to discuss, like, what's the best troubleshooting guide template that you want to adopt in your team. So I've showed you earlier a pretty simple one. And yeah, just experiment, learn it from the team, and hopefully you'll get to a point where you're happy with a more structured, well-written and tested troubleshooting guides. All right, let's see. We do have about 9 minutes, so maybe I'll show you a couple of TSGs, additional TSGs that have been done by the SQL community. So let me do that real quick. All right. There are actually three that I could have shown you, but we'll see how it goes in terms of time, right? So the first one, if you're already in Azure Data Studio, you could do Control-Shift-P, and then you will be able to see a couple of options. So when you type in SQL Server, the Jupyter Book SQL Server 2019 guide, that's available for you to use. It comes with Azure Data Studio, and it will show as provided books here. Now, this is troubleshooting guides for SQL Server 2019 Big Data Cluster. So if you went to Bugwoody's presentation earlier this morning and you really love or wanting to try BDC or Big Data Clusters, so this is one of the ways of troubleshooting BDC. So as you can see on the left here, it's a little bit more organized, where there's like section, like this book sections, and then the notebooks, the individual notebooks. So that's pretty cool. And you can navigate from one notebook to the other. Okay, and then there's another way of using other people's notebook too. So earlier I showed you how to copy and paste the role from GitHub to and open it in Azure Data Studio. There's another way, and this is the extension way. A person by the name of Emmanuel Menzo, he actually published a SQL Server Diagnostic Book extension. So he really wanted to share this collection of notebooks, and I happen to have it installed. So what that really means is when I go Control-Shift-P, I can now launch book SQL Server Diagnostic Book. And here it is. It's yet another book, and it's got a lot of useful scripts. So for example, Glenn Berry's diagnostic scripts are here, and there's also more. Let's see. The Sql Assessment Api, that's one of the examples that Aaron briefly mentioned, and some of the Tiger Toolbox. So it's kind of like if you have to train somebody, or if you are starting as a DBA and wanting to troubleshoot or have some kind of like already working troubleshooting guides, this could be one of the ways for you to get started. So the SQL Server Diagnostic Book. So shout out to Emmanuel here. All right. Okay, let's see where we are at with the PowerPoint. Okay, all right, jumpstart your notebooks. On the chat on YouTube, actually, I've shared a PowerShell Notebook commandlet or link to the PowerShell Notebook where you can learn more about it. So Doug Fink, I mentioned that before, has already written a number of useful commandlets in PowerShell for you to get started with converting your converting your notebook. So if you decide to convert it in batch, I would definitely recommend using the convert to SQL notebook or convert to Powershell notebook. But if you want to do one by one, then there's definitely an export to notebook UI in Azure Data Studio. So let me show you what that looks like briefly. Let's say, let's create a new file here. So if I have, let me just save it. Yep. Let's save it in my documents, maybe. SQL test.sql. Then save it as all files and save. Okay, so if I start typing select top 10 stuff from sys, text like this, and then put something like hello world. Now I can click and say export as notebook, and it becomes a notebook. So that's a quick way of converting from SQL to notebook really easily, which is really useful.
Right. So if your troubleshooting guide is currently maybe not in a OneNote file, but in a big long SQL file that has a lot of comments in it, you don't want to sit there one by one copying the comments over into text cells and the T-SQL into code cells. You can just hit this button and it'll go through there and take care of that all for you. We've tested it up to about 2,000 to 3,000 lines of code. If you get past 3,000 lines of code, you might want to split it up into multiple files, but works pretty well. It saves you a lot of time.
Yeah. So with a lot of these things, tooling help you to get started. Always audit your the outcome as well, by the way. Yeah. So thank you, Aaron. It was a fun project to work with you on that, actually. So
that was a blast.
Yeah. So a couple of quick tips. This is summarizing some of the things that I actually already mentioned, but I just want to remind you, there are ways of organizing your notebooks to Jupyter books. I gave you an example of good or great Jupyter books. I didn't show you the steps. That's probably for another session. Use Azure Data Studio because in most cases for data, especially SQL professionals, Azure Data Studio tailored that Jupyter Notebook experience for you there. And check out the executable TSGs for inspiration. So for example, the ones that I've shown you earlier, and pilot, learn, and iterate with your team. Okay, so you're probably where to go from here. Like, what could be possible with this executable TSG framework? This is what I'm envisaging, that teams around the world, you can do this too. Because actually, internally, this is one of the projects that I'm working on to make sure that it is possible to do a system like this, where you have an automated incident response flow. You use notebooks to identify problems or issues, and then you mitigate it. Hopefully some mitigation may be automated too. And there's some kind of auditing aspect of incident response as part of this execution. And now we're really applying software engineering practices to troubleshooting guides. So hopefully on calls and incident response is not one of those boring or stressful work. Hopefully it becomes more fun. You can bring your software engineering practices to incident response. All right, some of the takeaways. So notebooks are useful apparently for ops, because we have seen and we have talked to a number of folks in the community, and it looks like this is a really promising. Internally, we're actually using this myself for the team, for my team. And data community is definitely embracing notebooks more and more. Use Jumpstart your notebook conversion with some of the toolings that are available. Help the community as well to make the tooling better too. And some of the examples that are available out there are SQL Server 2019 BTC, as well as the Diagnostic Queries book from Glenn Berry. Yes, he has converted, I think, if I remember, all of his diagnostic queries SQL scripts to notebooks. So that's really awesome. And yeah, so Azure Data Studio is the best way to provide you with modern data experiences, including, from development all the way to troubleshooting. And speaking of development, Drew is coming up next to talk more about the SQL database projects. With that, please take time to take a screenshot. Here is the wonderful list of resources. And follow myself, MS SQL Girl, on Twitter, and SQL Variant Tara Nelson. We usually post a lot of useful tips there too.
Yep. All right.